Please start.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's topic is biodiversity. In this, I'm going to talk about meaning, status, and threats to biodiversity. And this presentation is structured in these subheadings. First, I'll talk about meaning of biodiversity, and then I'll go to levels of biodiversity, then status of biodiversity, distribution of biodiversity, values of biodiversity, threats to biodiversity, and IUCN Red List. And at last, I'll talk about the biodiversity significance of India. So, to start with, let us be aware of what is the meaning of biodiversity. The biodiversity consists of two words, bio and diversity, or in long form, it is biological diversity, which indicates the diversity of life forms in its simplest understanding. So that is the layman's way of understanding what is biodiversity. But scientifically, it has to be defined to encompass all the aspects of biodiversity. That is why the biodiversity is formally defined by the Convention on Biological Diversity, commonly called as CBT, as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including, among others, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, that means within one species, then diversity between many species or simply different species, and also diversity in terms of ecosystems. So the term biological diversity was coined by Thomas Lovejoy in 1980, and the short form of biological diversity, which is known as biodiversity, was given by Walter G. Rosen in 1985. Various terminologists, before coming to a conclusion for biodiversity, comes a long way. Say in 1916, the term biological diversity was first used by J. Arthur Harris in his book, The Variable Desert, Scientific American. The bare statement that the region contains a flora rich in genera and species and of diverse geographic origin or affinity is entirely inadequate as a description of its rare biological diversity, although it is not very widely publicized. So that is why it remained unknown. In 1947, the term natural diversity was introduced by John Turbock. In 1980, Thomas Lovejoy, as I have mentioned earlier, introduced and widely publicized the biological diversity to the scientific community in his book, and it became very common. And later, in 1985, according to Edward O. Wilson, the contracted form biodiversity was coined by W. G. Rosen. So the name was given by the W. G. Rosen, and it was reported by Edward O. Wilson. The National Forum on Biodiversity was conceived by Walter G. Rosen. So the term biodiversity in 1985 appears in the article A New Plan to Conserve the Earth's Biodiversity by Laura Tangley. So later on, from 1985, 1988, and so on, it becomes very, very popular. So till now, at present, the term has achieved widespread use. Now, as I have mentioned, that it encompasses three levels. That is the within species, And this is within species means that genetic diversity, what is there inside a particular species. So biodiversity takes into the consideration of genetic diversity. So genetic diversity refers to the variation of genes within the species. For example, Oryza sativa, the rice, has thousands of varieties which show variation at the genetic level and expressed in the form of its color, size, shape, aroma, and also nutrient content of the grain. So thousands of, even in India, we have thousands of varieties of rice. So that is within a single species, that is Oryza sativa. So we have genetic diversity. And species diversity, which is commonly understood to be the meaning of biological diversity, is the number and types of species present in the area. For example, the Western Ghats have greater amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. That means area differs in terms of the diversity of the species. So there are wide varieties, a wide range of species in the world. So that is species diversity. And then third level of biodiversity is ecosystem or ecological diversity, which refers the variation between different types of ecosystems. It refers to the variety of ecosystems or habitat in the given place. So everybody knows that what is a habitat? A habitat is the cumulative factor of the climate, vegetation, and geography of a region. So different habitats are existing in nature. So that is also a part of the biodiversity. Now, coming to the estimation of how many or how much biodiversity we have, or how many species are there on Earth, in layman's word, in simple word. Various authors, various workers have given different numbers, and there is no such specific number. The number cannot come into a specific conclusion. We could not, all the workers could not come to a specific conclusion. So there is no such precise value of the exact number of biodiversity. So current estimates for the number of species on Earth range between 10 millions and 15 millions. Just imagine a cap of 5 millions. So it's just like, you see, you have a bank account ranging from, say, 10 millions to $50 million in your account. So we have such a very unclear understanding of how many species are there on this Earth. So there is a massive degree of uncertainty regarding this. But some people say that it is, so many people say that it is 3 millions to 100 millions, but still that is too much a gap. So, but the general agreement on the number of species that are existing is ranging from 10 million to 15 million. That is what many people agreed and mostly publicized. Now, majority of this existing or estimated biodiversity are still there in the wild. We have not fully discovered. Majority of the species are not yet discovered. So far, we have in our hand 2.12 million species which are described or simply as identified. Even within this 2.12 million species, many of them are not fully described. But we have identified, we have proof that this much of species are existing in on this Earth. So, many authors, say Mora et al. In 2011, estimates that there are 8.7 million number of species. Costello et al. In 2013 gave the figure 5 million. Chapman in 2009 estimated there are 11 million species. Schaeffer's plates he was on the safer side that he did not mention, but he gave a range of estimation like 3 to 15, something like that. So there are such reports that are not giving exact number of the number of species on Earth. So far we have described 2.12 million, out of which insects form the majority, more than or around half of this, almost half of the species discovered so far. So insects constitute 1.05 million, fungi and protists come second, arachnids, mollusks, crustaceans, fishes, reptiles, birds, amphibians, mammals, corals in the order of reducing numbers. So they come in this way. So we have 2.12 millions as of now, so far described and identified. So why are we still so unsure of the number of species on Earth? There are various reasons. There are many areas, many geographical area which we cannot explore. They remain unexplored till now. Many rainforest canopies, very inaccessible areas are there, many such areas, inhospitable areas, and even tropical soils. How many species are there in the soil? And also how many species are there beneath the deep ocean? So such geographical constraints are there so that we cannot fully explore how many species will be there. Many species are tiny and inconspicuous. Microbes, roundworm, fungi, they look very similar. They are very small, too small. So that gives a difficulty. That is another one of the difficulties in identifying all the species. Again, some species are very similar in appearance, even trees, birds, whales. So there is conflict. There is difficulty in identifying. One person will agree that these two things are different species, but another people will be not agreeing to that. So there are some such problems. Overall, our knowledge of species and ecosystem is poor. Even out of the identified species, only 1/3 have been studied to some level. Of course, there are many organizations working on this, and many scientists, many conservationists, many ecologists are exploring. Within India also, in Delhi itself also, there are many people who are discovering many species every year. So certain agencies like the World Environment Conservation Unit, WCU, World Conservation Monitoring Center, and the UN Environmental Program, UNEP, are running a major project to discover new species at a fast rate. Now, how do we measure biodiversity? This is a simple thing that we used to carry out in our classroom also. Species richness is one thing that we carry out as a practical paper, practical subject. It is the measure of number of species found in an ecological community, landscape, or region. The species richness is how much species there are in an area. It does not take into account the abundances of the species or their relative abundance distributions. Another way of measuring the biodiversity is species evenness. It measures the proportion of species at a given site. For example, low evenness indicates that a few species dominate the site. Species evenness refers to how close in numbers each species in an environment is. So species evenness is, for example, there are 10 species and all 10 are evenly distributed, and the evenness of species is high. But say out of 10 species, one species represents in hundreds whereas other species are representing in single digit, one number, two numbers, not two, then the species evenness is very less. So that way we measure the biodiversity. Now biodiversity, now I'm coming to distribution of biodiversity on Earth. There is an even distribution of biodiversity on Earth. Biodiversity greatly varies between one part of the Earth and another. Generally, the tropical area with warm climatic conditions, having good rainfall, and all the ecological amplitudes are hosting majority of the biodiversity. So as you move from the tropical to polar region, then the distribution of biodiversity decreases. So even in the region-wise, the distribution of biodiversity differs. So among regions, many tropical areas to temperate areas, warm high rainfall areas, as compared high latitude or dry areas. In some tropical forests, mid-altitude have high diversity. Mid-altitude, we call it as mid-altitude perch. In coastal aquatic environments, biodiversity declines when salinity declines from normal seawater. So within that seawater, within the ocean, also you have the regional differences in terms of biodiversity distribution. There is also uneven distribution. Biodiversity is not equally distributed among biomes also. So terrestrial biodiversity is thought to be up to 25 times greater than ocean biodiversity. Within terrestrial biomes, forests harbor most of the biodiversity. Within terrestrial biomes itself, forests harbors maximum number of biodiversity. And it also differs among ecosystems. Say, for example, the La Selva Forest Reserve in Costa Rica, having 13.7 kilometers square area, which is a tropical forest, contains about 1,500 plant species, which is more than the total number of plant species found in the 243,500 kilometers square area comprising the whole of Great Britain. So we have that ecosystem differences. In the marine environment, coastal reef also possesses extremely rich biodiversity as compared to other parts of the marine ecosystem. So within that ecosystem also the distribution of biodiversity varies. Differences also occurs among countries. So countries that lie along the equatorial zone and have enormous number of species. Venezuela has 15,000 and 25,000 plant species. Brazil has as many as 55,000 flowering plant species. Tanzania has this much, 10,000. Indonesia has 20,000. India has 7,000 species. So if you go, say, Pakistan has 5,700. Nepal has 6,500. And Sri Lanka, although small in size, has 3,500 species of flowering plants, which is the highest diversity per unit area for the Asian region. So it varies from country to country. Why are this biodiversity unevenly distributed? What is the factor? What are the factors for unequal distribution of biodiversity? There are three factors that have been identified. One is physical or environmental factor is one of them. Say, for example, range of tolerance. Biodiversity has its specific range of tolerance, optimum range of tolerance we have. So that is met in the tropical area. So many of the species would survive in the climatic, salinity, and pH condition in the tropical area. So that is why they are richly distributed. Physical barriers are there as a physical factor. So physical restrictions, mountain ranges, rivers, deserts, also an island, also play important role in restricting the movement of the species. So that is why the biodiversity are unevenly distributed. There is another factor which is biotic factor. One type of life can dictate another type of life. For example, grasses attract antelopes. So when or wherever there is a food availability, then the organisms will move in search of the food. So there is a connection between one group of organism or one community and another community. So this is one of the, say for example, pollinators. So flowering plants attract pollinators. So wherever there is flowering plants, you will find many pollinators. Whales and lice or crustaceans. So lice and crustaceans, many of the lice and crustaceans and small microorganisms are attached to the mouth of the whales. So such factor such as biotic factor also determines the uneven distribution of biodiversity. And a third factor that contributes to the uneven distribution of biodiversity is evolutionary. So evolutionary is not like a ladder. It is not always connected from one step to the other. It is by chance. It is just like push just one place. Evolution takes place, and so the organisms survive in that area. More of the organisms are there. So it's all about chance. So these are the factors which contribute to the uneven distribution of biodiversity. Now, what about human beings? Just for our understanding, biodiversity are not equally distributed in terms of numbers and also in terms of biomass. So Baron et al. In 2018 quantified life using metric of biomass as plants account for more than 82% of the biomass. Tiny bacteria sum up to 18%. Just imagine tiny bacteria. We never expect that the organisms like microscopic bacteria will constitute 13% of the biomass. But much of the bacteria, microscopic bacteria, are lying beneath the seabed or ocean beds, which we cannot access. So that is why he estimated about 13%. Animal kingdom accounts for only 0.4%. Human beings account just 0.01% of biomass. So that means we need about 70 trillion of us to match Earth's collective biomass. Now, how much biodiversity is valued? How much biodiversity is worth? Now, Kate Beresford summarized. Kate Beresford is a lady who is in the South Africa university, one of the universities. So she estimated, and very renowned ecologist, that every year biodiversity provides service valued at between, she estimated in terms of the monetary value. So about US dollar 120 to 140 trillion every year biodiversity provides to human beings, and which is more than 1.5 times the entire annual global GDP. She also said that more than 55% of the world GDP depends on its services. It is by far the cheapest and most effective source of the services it offers, and it is in danger of going out of business. So in economics, she calculated the value of biodiversity and gave in the form of monetary value. Now, what actually is the value of biodiversity in our day-to-day life for a common people, irrespective of the profession, irrespective of the country, irrespective of whatever age or whatever things that we. But human into human community, how much biodiversity is giving service, or how much value does biodiversity have? It has a list of values. First is ecological values. It is a home, or it is a factor for nutrient cycling of, I mean, this manufacture or cycling of the nutrients, the energy, the biomass, all are given by the biodiversity. Biodiversity also gave food production as an ecological value. Lots of food we collect from the forest, from the oceans, from the pond, from aquatic ecosystem, from the terrestrial ecosystem, different types of ecosystems. We collect various types of food. It also helps in the climatic stability of a region, climatic stability of the watershed. It also helps in pollution control, soil regeneration and reduction in soil erosion, production of energy, and also serve as a barrier for calamities or reduction of calamities for cyclones, high winds, rain, floods, you name it. So, various ways in which biodiversity serves to human community, human society as ecological values. Another value is the social values. It has social values. Many of the plants and animals are considered holy and sacred in India and also throughout the world. It has most, see, there are many societies, many ethnic communities, many such communities in Southeast Asia, in African countries, where many plants or rivers or lakes are worshipped, forests are worshipped, and even particular plant or animals are also considered to be sacred. For example, tulsi, banyan tree, mango tree, cows, snakes, and so on. People tree is also one of them. So it serves it has a social values. Example, say in Meghalaya, hundreds of sacred groves are conserved as abode of their deities, and many rituals are performed. In Manipur, the Meitei community considered the sacred forest as the dwelling place of deities, Umanglais, they call it Umanglais, the goddess. The people worship the deities with the celebration of Lai Haraupa, blessing gods or merry festival of gods. There are many tribal communities in different states, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, many tribal communities which still look at the surrounding biodiversity as the source of not only their sustenance but the abode of their gods and goddesses, tribal gods or local gods. So it has social values. It has economic values. And this includes the service provided by biodiversity, which has both consumptive use value, wood, drug, medicines, and also productive values, silk. Just a minute. My battery is running down. Sorry.
Sorry, he will be back. Seems some that power issues over here in his laptop.
Oh, I'm back. Sorry, actually, I did not charge my laptop. Charger was not with cable was not with this laptop, so the battery was running very low. So now I have installed it. Okay, so coming back to the values of biodiversity. So the biodiversity has economic values. This includes the service provided by biodiversity, including consumptive use value as well as productive values. Moving on to the same, that means biodiversity values, we have ethical values. The biodiversity taught us that we are not the only the species that are living. We are simply, as I have shown in the previous slide, human beings contribute 0.04% in terms of biomass. So we are insignificant part of the biodiversity. And this teaches us that we have to value all the biodiversity of the world. So these values relate to the importance of protecting all forms of life. All the duty of every individual as biodiversity is valuable for the survival of human race. So it involves ethical issues like all life must be preserved. So every form of life is important and every form of life is unique and it warrants respect regardless of its worth to human beings, which is known as ecosystem's right of an organism. So we have equal share in the ecosystem. All species have equal stake on the earth. So that kind of ethical value biodiversity provides. And again, we have been appreciating the various types of biodiversity. We go to different places to see the beautiful things, beautiful whatever tourism it attracts. So there are many ecotourism sites. So aesthetic values also is provided by the biodiversity. So we appreciate natural landscapes, and these are priceless. And this provides opportunities for recreational activities like bird watching, photography, etc. And which is part of the ecotourism. And also it has so many optional values. That means keeping future possibilities open for their use is called optional values. It is difficult to predict which of the species would turn out useful in near future. We never know that a particular species, particular organism may not be of value at present, but you never know that at one point of time, because research is going on, so at one point of time, this may be of great value, and which may be one of the factors for even for various ailments, various medicines for curing our diseases. So different things are not seen we cannot predict, we cannot forecast. But this may be of value. So this is what we call as optional values. Now, what are the threats to biodiversity? In the Network for Business Sustainability, Kate Beresford lists 5 threats to biodiversity. All kinds of threats come under these 5 types of threats. First is land and water use change, land use change. We have, and also second is overexploitation of biodiversity, climate change, pollution, invasive species. So 5 major threats to biodiversity have been listed. Now, how they are playing havoc, how they are factor for or simply drivers for biodiversity loss or extinction. So first is land use and water use change. The dramatic alteration of habitats, land use change due to deforestation, conversion to agriculture, fragmentation of ecosystem, etc. The respective environments are unable to protect shelter, food. That particular ecosystem, once they are disintegrated, will not be able to supply food, water, and also breeding grounds for many living organisms. So this plays major threats to the loss of biodiversity. Many of the animal corridors are cut. Many animals travel a long distance. Say, for example, elephants. They live in for one season, they will live in one place in warmer area, and when the season change, they will move to another place. So traveling hundreds of kilometers to complete their life cycle. So if such corridor are narrow strip of land, so many a times corridors are being cut. So in this way, they could not perform their life activities. They cannot reproduce themselves naturally. So this poses a serious problem, leading to reduction of many of these species. Monoculture is another form of agriculture practice, which is a land use form. In Northern America, the corn cultivation has resulted into loss of so many local biodiversity. Similarly, when wetlands are converted to construction sites, various life forms are disappeared permanently. So as an expansion or infrastructure development, many of the wetlands have been converted into an urban area. So the biodiversity that were there in the urban ecosystem gets lost. Another way of destruction to biodiversity is overexploitation, overhunting, overfishing, overgrazing, overcollection of species leads to loss of biodiversity. Changing consumption patterns of human is often cited as the key reason for this unsustainable exploitation of natural resources. Presently, many marine fish populations around the world are overharvested, endangering the continued existence of some commercially important species. It is estimated that about 25% of the world fisheries are now overfished to the point where their current biomass is less than the sustainable mass. So such situations are prevailing at this point of time. Another important factor or driver for biodiversity loss is climate change. Climate change, as we all understand, it alters the regional climates, including rainfall, snowfall, and also the various phenology of the plants, flowering plants, flowering time, shedding time, fruiting time. So it has caused lots of such mismatch, making habitats less hospitable to the species living in them. The warming trend will shift colder climates towards the north and south poles, and which force the species to move with their adapted climate norms while facing habitat gaps along the way. The shifting ranges will impose new competitive regimes on species as they find themselves in contact with other species not present in their historic range. When such shift occurs, the species have to move to new places. So in that event, many of the species encounter to hostile species, and in the process they fight, and the fitter one, the fittest one, or the stronger one survive. Many of the weak species died. So this forced species to either move in order to find favorable conditions in which they live, or to adapt to their new climate. So in the process, some species may be finding the new ecosystem good, viable, but many of the species end up in losing their lives. So this way, the biodiversity has been threatened by climate change. Pollution is another factor for biodiversity loss. So pollution of air, soil, and water poses a serious problems to many ecosystems and biodiversity therein. Tiny bits of plastic suspended in ocean water build up inside fish, birds, and other marine species. So it end up in the alimentary canal, and since plastics cannot be digested, the individuals, the organisms, end their life like that. Industrial toxins kill many species in rivers and lakes. Air pollution makes its way into soil, leaves, and water. It all adds up to fewer species, less diversity, and weakened ecosystem. So pollution poses a serious threat to the biodiversity. Another driver of biodiversity loss is invasive species, or we call it as invasive alien species, IAS. So disturbance of the original ecosystem, disease transmission, and disruption of food webs. We have so many invasive plants and invasive animals in India itself. Many of the invasive species are introduced as the economic value, or sometimes as the for beautification of the landscape. So we have such many species, such as eucalyptus water plant, which are introduced from Australia to the Western Ghats, and these have been flourishing luxuriously at the expense of the native species. So, for example, the Western Ghats, the Shola forests have been cleared by the eucalyptus. So that kind of things happen. Nowadays, the Indian bison makes frequent visits to the Kodaikanal town in Tamil Nadu because of the non-availability of food due to intensive plantation of the alien species. So, according to the Green Fact Foundation, nearly 40% of all animal extinction since the 17th century are associated with invasive alien species. 80% of the threatened species in the Fynbos biome of South Africa are endangered as a result of invading alien species. So to that extent, we have the invasive species posing such great threats. Now, depending on the threat perspective, IUCN categorized different groups of biodiversity on the basis of how much it is threatened. So IUCN red list categories and criteria are intended to be an easily and widely understood system for classifying species at high risk of global extinction. So it divides species into 9 categories such as not evaluated, data deficient, least concern, near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critical endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct. So IUCN lists these 9 categories and given the explanation such extinct is beyond reasonable doubt that the species is no longer extant, that means no longer living. Extinct in the wild, that means those species only survive under the management of the human beings, but in the wild it is no more found. Critically endangered, that means in a particular and extremely critical state. Endangered, we have very high risks of extinction in the wild, and which meets any of the criteria A and E, means endangered and extinct. For endangered, vulnerability meets one of the 5 red list criteria and thus considered to be at high risk of a natural human-caused extinction without further human intervention. Near threatened, close to being endangered in the near future. Least concern, unlikely to become endangered or extinct in the near future. Data deficient, data sufficient, data is not available, not evaluated, that means those species are found in plenty or not there. Nothing to worry. So that kind of thing. So on the basis of the increasing risk of extinction, these 9 categories are listed, not evaluated, and evaluated. The protest way of classification is the species which are not evaluated and evaluated. Under the evaluated, we have data deficient, sufficient data is not available, and another is the adequate data. And under this adequate data, we have different categories such as least concern, near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, extinct. So we have that kind of list given by the IUCN red list records. So on the basis of the distribution and the level of threats, the World Conservation International carried out or simply identified 36 biodiversity hotspots. And this work was started by the Mayer and later on taken over by the Conservation International. And at present, we have 36 biodiversity hotspots. And these represent just 2.5% of the Earth's land surface, and which support about 50% of the world's endemic plant species. Endemic species are those species which are found in particular area and not found anywhere else other than that area. And these 36 biodiversity hotspots represents nearly 43% of bird, mammal, reptiles, and amphibian species as endemic. So we know that criteria on the basis of these 2 criteria, biodiversity hotspots are identified. First criteria is it must have at least 1,500 vascular plants as endemic. That means it must have a high percentage of plant life found nowhere else on the planet. So a hotspot, in other words, is irreplaceable. And second condition is it must have 30% or less of its original natural vegetation. In other words, it must be threatened. That means more than 70% of the original native species are getting lost. So, where does India stand in terms of biodiversity? India is rich in biodiversity. because of the location. So India, with 2.4% of the world's area, has over 8% of the world's total biodiversity, making it one of the 12 mega diversity countries in the world. So based on pattern of distribution of plants and animals, India is divided into 10 biogeographic zones given by Rogers and Banwar in 1988. So they classified the subcontinent India into 10 biogeographic zones on the basis of the group of plants in similar plants in a particular area. So they have given this Himalaya, desert, semi-arid, Western Ghats, Deccan Peninsula, Gangetic Plain, coast, northeast, and islands. So these are the different biogeographic zones of India. Now, how is biodiversity in India? What is the status? So approximately there are 350 mammals which make up 7.6% of the world species. In India are there 1,224 birds which make up 2.6% of the world species, 197 amphibians which make up 4.4% of the world species, 408 reptiles which make up 6.2% of the world species, 2,546 fishes which make up 11.7% of the species, 15,000 flowering plants which make up 6% of the world species. So these are the species wise which are present in India. In India, there are 4 hotspots. India shares 4 hotspots out of 36 in the world. And these are Western Ghats, Himalayas, Indo-Burma region, and Sundaland. And these are the Western Ghats, the first biodiversity hotspots, along with the Sri Lanka. So here in this, around 77% of the amphibians and 62% of the reptiles are endemic in Western Ghats. More than 6,000 vascular plants here, which belong to more than 2,500 genus. 3,000 plants out of these are endemic, home to around 450 species of birds, 140 mammals, 260 reptiles, and 175 amphibians. So this much biodiversity is there. These are the notable biodiversity that are there. Many more are there, which are not listed here in this slide. Second biodiversity hotspot in India is Himalayas, and which comprises entire Himalayas, including Bhutan, Northeast India, Southern Himalaya, Central Eastern Nepal. So here in Himalayas, we have 163 endangered species in this region. Many of the one-horned rhinoceros, wild Asian water buffalo, 45 mammals, 50 birds, 12 amphibians, 17 reptiles, 3 invertebrates, and 37 plant species. So these are endemic. So we have another notable endemic, that is animal, dragonfly is there, which is found in Himalaya and in Japan only in this world. 10,000 species of plants in the Himalayas, a third of which is endemic. So this is the situation in Himalayas. Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot is another hotspot, and we share with the Myanmar, Yunnan province of China, Laos, People's Democratic Republic, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. So here in this Indo-Burma, we have 1,300 species of birds. We have almost 13,500 plant species in this Indo-Burma region of India. And another fourth biodiversity in India is Sundaland. So this region lies in Southeast Asia, and includes Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia. And in India, we have Andaman and Nicobar Islands, or Nicobar Islands, southern part of Andaman and Nicobar Island. In this, 25,000 species of vascular plants, of which 15,000 species, that means 60%, are endemic. And this hotspot is the home to 769 species of birds, of which 142 are endemic. These islands have a rich terrestrial as well as marine ecosystem, including mangroves, seagrass, beds, and coral reefs. Species such as dolphins, whales, turtles, crocodiles, fishes, prawns, lobsters, and seashells comprise marine biodiversity. So these are the status of the Indian subcontinent, and we have vast area, and also we are home to several species of the world. So India is also one of the mega biodiversity country. There are only 12 mega biodiversity countries, and India is one of them. So I'll just end up with that. And these are the biodiversity status and threats. Thank you.
Thank you. Learners, we can have an interaction.